go through what I'm actually thinking when I'm out lure fishing, heavy tackle lure fishing, what I'm trying to achieve when I'm out there, what I'm trying to achieve once I hook a fish. So, because there's quite a few things that I'm thinking to try to catch that extra fish. Now, when I'm lure fishing, I always look back at Kona, what I learned there about the rigging and stuff like that, and about how the lures run. I think you can't get a better place, as I mentioned in my previous video, to go and learn about lure fishing. But I was a crewman there. I never got to run the boat, and I never really got to fight the fish. So I feel that lure fishing is half about how you rig the lures, and then half about how you actually fight the fish. And when I was in Cape Verde, that's what I got a chance to do, is really learn how to fight fish and learn how to angle fish as well. That was a very big part of it, and that's the big part about being successful lure fishing. And I'm going to run through what I'm thinking about when I'm out there. So a lot of guys will ask me, ask this question. I'm like, why did you catch that fish? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, just make it really simple. The answer is really simple. I'm like, because the fish was hooked. Okay, so we know to catch the fish because it's hooked on a lure, okay? You can pretty much do whatever you want. Fish is not going to fall off. It's hooked well. Those are the ones that I don't really worry about too much. So what I'm always thinking when I'm lure fishing and I'm out there, I'm actually thinking about the fish that's not hooked. So I'm fighting the fish majority of the time like it's not hooked, because those are the ones that you can get your extra numbers up on. If you're catching the extra fish that is only hooked around the bill, because a lot of the fish that we lose are because they're hooked around the bill. So when I go out there, I'm always thinking about that fish that's hooked around the bill and how I can go about catching it. So even if it's hooked, I still will fight the fish generally like this. There's a couple of other things that I'll talk about later in this video about watching how it, like working out if it's hooked or not hooked. But I'll get onto that later. So basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to catch that fish, as I say, that's not hooked. Now that fish that's not hooked is normally hooked around the bill, okay? So it'll have the hook around the bill. Now, the first thing I'm trying to do is put the lure behind the fish. Now, what I say by that is when I get a bite, I straight away have my drag backed off to like say 5 kilos or something like that. I used to fish 1/3 of the drag of the breaking strain of the line was my drag. Say it was 80 pound or 37 kilo, I'd be fishing 12 kilos on the bite. I came back off that because what I'm trying to do is, if the fish comes in and it gives me a chance, and that means by hitting the lure, that's a chance. If it's not hooked and it's round the bill, I want to try to keep it there, okay? Before, when I was using the heavier drag on the bite, I had a theory that it was going to pull the hook away from the fish, and then hopefully the fish will come back and eat better and I'll get a cleaner hookup. But I thought to myself, well, hey, the fish has given me a chance. It's got the hook around the bill. How do I catch that one? So that's why I started using the light drag. What it started to do as well is it changed the fish's behavior completely using that light drag. Fish would stay up on the surface a lot more and allow me to chase the fish and catch it a lot quicker. So with having that fish hooked around the bill, or it could be hooked well, but at the start of the fight, all I'm trying to do is stay in touch with that fish. So I've got the drag set at 5 kilos. That's my magic number on any line weight. I'm using that on 60 kilo, 37, 24, 15. I'm using it on every one. And all I'm trying to do from the very start is put the lure behind the fish. So if you take anything out of this about lure fishing is try to keep the lure behind the fish. Now the reason for that is, if you look at a marlin, if you have the hook around the bill and the lure behind the fish, that hook has got to go all the way over the head, down the body and off the tail to come off. If the lure is in front of the fish and it's not hooked, it's only just around the bill, it's only just got to come off the end of the bill and that fish is gone. So the first thing, as I say, I'm trying to do is keep the lure behind the fish. I'm doing this in a number of ways. One, keeping that drag very light. And as I say, that changed the behavior of the fish. They like to stay up on the surface a lot more. The other thing is too, I am starting to maneuver the boat, whether it's backwards or forwards, to chase that fish and put a slight belly in the line. So what I'm using the light drag for at this stage is only using just enough drag to pull that belly out. And I'll get a lot of anglers going to me, oh, I've lost the fish, I've got slack line. Well, there's no slack line. There may be slack line at the angler end, but there's no slack line at the fish end, because you've got a big belly of line, which is dragging, and you've got the lure itself dragging behind it. That's enough to keep the fish, to keep the lure behind the fish. And that's all we're trying to achieve. Now, what that happens is the fish eventually will decide to go down. But since I've stayed behind the fish, what I can do is I can use a big change of drag, and especially heavy tackle fishing, the lighter the drag I keep it, the bigger drag change I can use. So say I'm going to use that 37 kilo line again. I've got very little drag at 5 to 6 kilos on that fish initially. Fish is going to decide to go down. And since I'm staying behind the fish, I can now aggressively use a drag change on that and hit it with 12 to 15 kilos. That big drag change will quite often change the behavior of the fish, and it'll still allow you to stay behind the fish because you've got angle on it at this stage as well. Because what you'll find is, like, if you hit the fish with a lot of drag and you're straight up and down on it, quite often what will happen is the fish will change direction and you'll lose track of where the fish is because you've lost angle, and that as it turns, you'll pull the drag from the other direction off the front of the fish, and you'll pull the hook straight off the fish. So staying behind the fish in this situation is quite important. Now, in a big boat, it's quite easy to do that. You can just stop the boat, let the angle build, and hit it with drag as the fish swims away, and put the drag on, and it'll lift the fish up. But the problem with it in a small boat, like in a trailer boat, quite often what will happen is that change of drag on that 80, like on the 37 kilo line, will actually pull the boat over the top of the fish instead of pulling on the fish. And you'll have to keep the boat just slowly pulling off the fish to keep angle on it while you've got that heavy drag on, so you can keep in touch with where the fish is, so you're staying behind it. So the whole time I'm fighting the fish, I'm trying to stay behind it. I am because if I stay behind it, I've got a very, very good chance that I can catch the fish that isn't hooked. Now, a bit of patience comes in here. If you're impatient and you decide to turn an angle on it, you can easily pull the hook off. But there's a couple of things you can do once you've started to pay attention to how the fish reacts on the bite. So another good tip is when you get the fish to the boat, always look at how it's hooked and how it fought on the initial bite, okay? And I always do this, so I'm always watching, hopefully get to see the bite, and then I'm watching the behavior of the fish straight away after the bite. Now, if the fish comes in and eats and it just goes aerial, or it starts to thrash straight away and jump a lot and that, I'm quite confident that that fish will have felt the hook and it's hooked somewhere, okay? If I get a fish that comes in, and quite often you won't see the fish, it'll just like be a very quick bite, and it'll do a very hard run away from the boat, and you'll think, geez, I've got a really big fish on here, and it'll dump a lot of line very quickly. Quite often that's the fish that's not hooked, because what it's doing is it's panicking, it doesn't know what's wrong, but it'll be going very fast, and quite often you'll have scenarios where it'll eat the lure, rip a whole heap of line, and then actually come off after it's dumped like half a spool. So the reason why that's happening, as I say, it's panicking, it's not feeling any pain, it doesn't know what's happening. So those two scenarios there, you want to pay close attention once you've started to catch a few fish of where they're hooked and how they fight, because it'll dictate to what you can do while you're fighting. So as I say, I always try to stay behind the fish, but if I've had a fish at the start that I think is hooked, and that change of drag from pulling from behind hasn't worked, I will then go ahead and change the angle. I'll turn around, get in front of the fish and pull off to one side of it, and that. But that's my last resort at trying to get a fish up. So, yeah, so when I'm out lure fishing, and I get a fish on. First thing I'm trying to do is put the lure behind the fish, and that is with the light drag, putting a little bit of a belly in the water, and then I'm trying to manage the amount of line loss with myself chasing the boat. So that's the first thing I'm trying to think of. The second thing is when it starts to go down, I'm starting to think of, okay, do I think the fish is hooked? How am I going to attack that? And my first thing is to change that, like use that brutal change of drag. Now, I use all the drag range. I don't just use, like, a lot of people go, oh yeah, but you're only fishing really light. Well, no, I'm using sunset a lot as well. So as I say, on the 37 kilo line, there's a time when the fish has gone down, you need to come up on the drag. Okay, you need to use a lot of drag to stop these fish quite often when they go deep. And that's what the beauty of using the heavy hooks when I'm out heavy tackle fishing is my change of drag is big, and I can use a lot of drag on the fish when I need to. So when it starts to go down, don't be scared to pull on these fish, you know. So so when I'm lure fishing, that's what I'm always thinking about, is trying to keep the lure behind the fish and trying to use my change of drag to my advantage. It's helped me a lot when I've come to catch the extra fish that aren't hooked, and that's how you start to get your real numbers up when you're lure fishing, is trying to catch that one that's not hooked.